All right. So, welcome everybody to the episode 3 of the Art Therapy. Today we have a very special session revolving around finding jobs in games, the experience of working in games, and how to kind of balance certain mental health topics when you're working in a production company. So, I'm just going to jump right ahead because it's going to be a complex one today. All right. So here is the question, the number one question that we've had, and I think this is a great start for this session today. As someone who hasn't yet started looking for their first job in the industry, I've come across a lot of advice that I'm not sure I fully trust, and I'd love to hear your personal perspective. For example, some people suggest choosing a studio or project you'd like to join and building your portfolio exclusively in that style so that HR can immediately see you as a part of the team. Do you think that's actually necessary? Or is it enough if the work is simply strong, regardless of style? I think most beginners on the server try to follow the flow on AAA projects, but realistically, landing a first job on such a project is very difficult, and casual, mobile, or startup and their specific art styles are more likely to be the starting point. It is a really good question. I want to clarify on something at the beginning. Let's get our color palette here. I don't think, based on my experience, I don't think this is true. I mean, it is very difficult to find a job. You know, the quality bar, is very high. But what I disagree with is this part specifically. I don't think finding a job in mobile games, is easier than finding a job in AAA games. The same way that, a job is a job in games, and being prepared for making games is actually being, it's a bar that's there. I don't want to get entangled in this. To me, it's more difficult to actually make mobile games than to make AAAs because, based on my VR experience, which is my very limited experience in mobile chipsets and so on, a VR, I don't know about the hardware today, but the hardware back when I was doing VR was a very similar hardware than we had in mobiles, or phones and so on. So I do have some experience in optimizing for mobile, and it's not easy at all. It's very challenging, a lot more challenging than optimizing for AAAs. It's a different thing. Again, I don't think it's more difficult to find a job in mobile. So I disagree with this. Now let's go with the question itself. Some people suggest choosing a studio or project you'd like to join and building your portfolio exclusively in that style. This is what I call tailoring. What everyone calls tailoring a portfolio, obviously to the goals or your goals. So tailoring a portfolio to your goals. I think this is crucial. I've done talks about this in games conventions, and I believe this is very, very important to being a relevant candidate out of the huge bunch of people that are applying right now to specific studios. And this can be overwhelming because you might think you're putting all your eggs in one basket, right? So if I, for example, want to work on Fortnite and I make, just because of the style, and I make all my portfolio assets as, Fortnite style assets. If I do that and then I apply to Fortnite and Epic Games and I don't get the job, then it feels like, I am, losing or closing my portfolio up to the entire rest of the market that doesn't have a Fortnite style portfolio. So yes, this if you don't do it carefully, you can incur in this problem. But generally, a good lead, good director, or a hiring manager for a certain art position is going to be very good at translating your style to, or the specific style of the Fortnite game to maybe something like, I don't know, similar style with a similar game. So if the way I would strategize about this tailoring your portfolio is most likely by generating a little bit more of a generic style. So for example, fan art is a great way to do this, to follow a certain studio's direction or a game's direction, showing that you're able to adapt to various styles. And this can easily open the door to outsourcing studios, for example, which I think that if this could be true as a statement, it's easier to find a job in a certain place than another, like on AAAs, that's going to be outsourcing studios. Generally, outsourcing studios work on bulk production, like very large amounts of work, and they're going to need a lot of people for that. And obviously, if your portfolio shows a variety of styles, or not styles, but let's say outputs, then it's going to be a little bit easier to show that you have a varied. It's going to be another one of those difficult starts. But yeah, it's going to be a little bit easier to show that you have a range of, you can cover a certain range of production styles. Let's see. I want to not make the same mistake as the past episode, and I'm going to read the chat constantly. Slaven is saying, I saw a couple of people that got hired by certain studios based upon them doing environment or props as a fan art of the studio. Yes, I'm not sure if this is an international thing, but I remember that when I started working in Spain, a lot of my peers love doing fan art. Like, for example, I have this friend, Mario, who did, I think it was an Overwatch fan art. He was a concept artist, and it just looked amazing. This guy got a lot of job offers. Why? Because like our theory back then, which makes all the sense in the world, he showed very well that he could take the style of a game, and without much guidance from the studio itself, he could get the results that really fit the style of the game. So this is why I think tailoring a portfolio is important. And I made a whole presentation about this that unfortunately I don't think I can share right now. And I'm not sure it's recorded. I don't think it is. But like as kind of like a small, how do you call it? Resumen. I know I have some couple of Spanish people here that can help me maybe with that translation. As a sum up, yes, thanks, Rodri. So as a sum up for that talk, I was saying, like, if you want to work for Call of Duty, don't create stylized assets. Go for realism. If you want to work for Little Nightmares 2, then go for something like stylized but with realistic material definitions. Or if you want to work for Fortnite, kind of do the same but going more to the stylized direction. So adapting to your portfolio, at least to the generic style that the studio follows. So if you want to work for Activision on Call of Duty, and you also might be okay with working on Battlefield and also maybe on Arma 4 if that's going on, I don't know. And, then you're going to want to do realistic contemporary assets, or at most, you're going to want to go for like World War I, World War II, so on and so forth. If you want to do sci-fi, or if you want to do sci-fi for your portfolio and then you try to apply it to these studios, maybe you don't have such luck, or it's not so much tailored for those companies than it would be if you do contemporary, or like maybe the past 75 years from a historical standpoint. Does this make sense? So the way I would strategize this is, as a student, a project a month. So if you're, for example, if you're an environment artist, it's going to be less than that because environments take more than a month to make. 1 second, my mouse is being a little silly. But let's say you are a props artist. So a props artist, a project a month, per month. Okay. When you do this, you're going to end up with 12 projects in a year. Okay. So you can choose 12 different games that kind of fit a similar genre. And maybe you can try to find within the similarities of the games, you can also find the difference of those games. So let's talk about realism. Maybe I'm not ready to give very concrete examples. 12 crowbars from Half-Life. No, but for example, a great way to create, how do you call this, fan art is by upressing art, right? So if, for example, you like Half-Life, you could create the crowbar from Half-Life, but, make it for a game that would be released in 2025. Or a sword from The Witcher. I would say that enters more of the fantasy realm. But again, that's the thing. If you're aiming for a portfolio, if you're aiming for companies that do fantasy games, then maybe develop one piece a month that is based on fantasy universes. And you can switch it up. You don't have to do 12 fan arts in a year, because probably that's going to send a different message than you might want. This person doesn't have original ideas, or only knows how to copy certain things, and that could happen actually. Like you might give that impression. So I would say mix it up, but do stay within the fantasy realm if what you want to do is fantasy, or do stay within the 75 years in the past to today if you want to do stuff like Battlefield, Call of Duty, etc., etc. And the most important thing about this is to realize that, like, the goal that you have for your art. Why did you start art? Yes, Franco, there's going to be VOD on my YouTube channel, as there always is. It's probably going to come next Monday, though, so yes. So why did you start art? Let's all get an answer for this question. From my personal experience, fun. That's why I started art, because it was fun, you know? It was a hobby for me. So ultimately, this is what I've done, okay? I've worked roughly around this strategy of tailoring my portfolio, but at the end of the day, my main goal was to have fun. When I didn't have fun with a piece, when I was like, oh, it's the 10th piece I do this year and it's another fantasy piece and this is boring, and I don't see like that space for thinking outside of the box anymore, and I feel like I'm not learning. Switch it up, no problem. A plan is only there to give you the baseline of what you can be doing. If you feel like, oh, 12 pieces, amazing, I'm having so much fun doing fantasy, then great, you found your niche, which is a great thing to find. But if that doesn't feel like that, and most likely it will not feel like that, then just remember, what you wanted to do in the first place was to have fun. And we never should forget about this, okay? Because the moment we forget about having fun with art, burnout happens. So the strategy, tailoring a portfolio, is an amazing way to build a portfolio. Find your, let's say, 3 main games that you like, and try to see also what other artists are doing in their portfolios. So what are, let's say, we're doing Battlefield, we're doing Call of Duty, and we're also doing Arma. This is the 3 that I can maybe find ranging between arcade and realistic combat games. So find the artists who work there and take a look at their portfolios, and try to figure out what you can take from those portfolios. So what do their portfolios look like? Okay, that's another great way, I think, to put out this tailoring of the portfolio. Sometimes we need reference. All the time we need reference. At least, you know, when it comes to 3D modeling, I use reference all the time. So why wouldn't I use that reference also to know how to build my portfolio? So that's going to be the answer to my question. Andreu, I hope everything is well. Have a good afternoon. So yes, okay. So I hope that makes sense, this answer. And we have people here who have already had industry experience, and I would love to hear their input on this one. For me, this has worked, but at the end of the day, why are we having this question? We're having this question because we don't know where to start. When you don't know your direction, you might know where to start, but you don't know the direction that you want to take. And this is what tailoring a portfolio is going to be good for, like, you know, sending it out to companies, to the Battlefield team, to the Call of Duty team, whatever. But in reality, what it's giving us is a direction. And that's really, really powerful. Melissa is saying, when you feel completely overwhelmed by all the amazing artists on ArtStation, you look up as reference, you need to watch Javi's first episode. Absolutely. Don't compare yourself to others like that. Okay, so this was Lisa's question. What do you think? Is this something that makes sense as a start? Do you have any, let's say, how do you call these? Nuances that you want to discuss? Okay, that's a great nuance, I would say. You agree, but you don't know what you like to do yet. You just started. That's great. Maybe you know what you like to play. Maybe you know you like to play, in my case, for example, Resident Evil. And I love the art style of those games. So maybe I can start there, you know? So that could be a great start. You know what you like to play. Maybe you don't know the art you like, but you know what you want to play and what you like to play. So maybe you can start there. And and I guess this also relates to this second question that you have. So let's warm it up. Don't be scared to drop something. Sometimes we make a decision, and the worst thing we can do is marry with that decision, like we're gonna, you know, until death do us apart, or part, or whatever. That's the worst thing you can do, in my opinion, When you make a decision and you recognize that that decision doesn't work, just throw it away. No problem. So maybe start a project, see if it goes. If it doesn't, throw it away. And do that until you maybe have found that thing that motivates you. And we could argue that's bad advice because it's not going to teach you how to finish something and whatnot. But the goal here, again, is to find direction. And if you find the incorrect direction, if you're going here, you know, like you don't know exactly where you're going. Okay, so you don't know about this point over here. And maybe when you take this direction and you do kind of like this and you find something else, if that something else isn't this, then you also know that this isn't the way. So don't be scared to course correct until you find that. Okay, so that's the purpose now. The purpose is to find what you like and give you a direction. So let's see. My problem is that I like everything. That's great. That's not a problem to have, I think. It is if you suffer from some sort of like nervous impatience of I can't wait to finish something and then you start rushing it. But I think that's kind of a different conversation. And because I don't want to extend this a lot, probably we could and we should discuss this maybe a different time. I would love to make that a question for the fourth episode, if you're okay with that. So Melissa says, just make stuff, study small projects, different styles, you will find it out. It can take a while, but you will find it. Yes, absolutely. And if you don't find it, then that is still fine. You just need to tailor to get a job, but you can still make all the things you want to make. Yeah, so find that direction. I deleted that, but yes. Okay, so I think that's a great first question. Okay, so as someone who just started learning and didn't even start to build a portfolio, all right, let's start that again. As someone who just started learning and didn't even start up to build a portfolio, with each study project, the experience grows almost exponentially. Because of this, by the time I finish one prop and start another, I can already see tons of mistakes in the previous one and so on. Is there a way to avoid falling into perfectionism while still recognizing when something is good enough for the portfolio? Should I post and keep older works to show growth, or constantly delete and replace them with newer, better ones? Okay, 1 second, because this is a second question, and I would say the first question stops there. So yes, perfectionism, we talked about this. Don't let perfect ruin great. And setting goals is incredibly important. Goals, okay? So what is the goal for a piece? When I was studying, I remember this. I remember talking to my parents, to my teacher, and they were saying, like my teacher especially was saying, you never finish anything. And you know, learning to finish something is really, really important. I agree, you know, it teaches you certain things. But then maybe sometimes you commit to a very long project and the process of reiterating at some point becomes repetitive. And not all advice works for everybody also. So learn how to finish something, I think, is a great thing to do. But at the same time, when the goal is to learn, maybe you have to create this sort of balance as in like a comparison of weights, in which you try to understand what is more important, to learn the hard skills or to learn the soft skills. And I would say that, again, because my personal goal with art from the very beginning was to have fun. My goals were heavily relying on having fun, but also keeping myself like stimulated by learning. You know, when that stopped, I lost interest, and it was about pressuring myself. And I thought, I will learn to do this when I have a job and I have no other choice, than to finish something. That worked for me personally. And, you know, when I entered my first positions, I just needed some time to adapt to that, to learn how to, you know, cope with having to finish something, even if that something wasn't incredibly interesting for me. But again, the goals just changed, you know, and those goals, they can be your expectations. So goals turn into expectations. And when you're studying, your expectation is to learn. And again, you know, every single thing in life is a sacrifice. So your goals, you can't have all the goals met with every project. Some projects will work for something, some others will work for other things. But again, goals become expectations. So what are the expectations when learning? In my opinion, let's do a little arrow like this just to what my expectations when learning is learning, having fun, making it rewarding. Okay. And we could say we could organize them by importance. But this is probably the first goal in my weight. Let's say this is the heaviest goal for me, making it rewarding. But again, if we switch this up for like the expectations when working, those change, because now all of a sudden you have to develop something for someone else. Or like Sad was saying the other day, solve someone else's problems. And we could argue that when learning, you want to create, like you want to be prepared as a professional to solve someone else's problems. But again, like when you learn enough, when you're prepared enough to finalize a certain project, and again, we have to understand that we're not talking about dropping every single project we start. That wouldn't be healthy. You know, we are detecting some sort of, lacking thing there that we would need to work on. But if from time to time we just decide that it's okay to drop that project because again it's not rewarding, and I will develop these things when I'm working, I would say again, this is your goal. I just don't want to get entangled a lot. I'm trying to solve that from other sessions, and I also don't want to be under explaining things. So please feel free to participate in the chat and give me, guide me through, okay, I got it. Just stop going in circles about the same thing, which is something I tend to do a huge lot. So for me, that's the answer to your first question. Is how do you first off, what happens? I don't know if you you mentioned this when you drop a project. That's fine, and if you need that's one thing. But I guess we were answering a different question. Why did I have the feeling that we were answering this question? What was I yapping about something that didn't make sense for 10 minutes? Hopefully not. Hopefully that made some sense. Okay. What if you do that constantly? What if you constantly drop a project? I would say don't be scared. Don't be scared to be alone with yourself for a little bit and think, why did I drop this project? And think about that. Why did I drop this project? It's because I was already thinking about the next one. Okay, so maybe that's you just being a little impatient. Maybe it's because that project stopped being rewarding. And again, that's maybe because your expectations are to create a perfect project, to learn at the same time, to have fun, and also make it super rewarding. And then what you're creating for yourself is incredible expectations that probably a lot of people can't meet. That's kind of like once in a lifetime thing when you're meeting all these things, all these variables. So that's introspective. That's the be a little bit like Gollum and talk with yourself type of thing. Why am I doing this? I cannot give you that answer. You're going to have to stop and think for a moment. But maybe lead it towards this. What are the goals and have I met those goals? And if you have, then maybe you haven't dropped something. Maybe you just met your goals and you consider something done. Because sometimes done for you is different than done for me. If I'm making a study, like a sketch, we can obviously not call a sketch a finished piece, but that's goals. If you're dropping something at the sketch part, again, maybe that means that your goal was just to sketch something, study, sketch study. So you have to talk to yourself about that. Ginny is saying, do you have an example of a project that you found rewarding or fun to work on, especially non-work related? I'm not very ready for that, I guess. Let's see. A project that I found rewarding, especially non-work related. Yes, very much. Yeah, I remember. For example, when I started learning Fusion 360 5 years ago, I did this under personal projects, projects that I'm going to do for myself with the goal of learning. And I'm going to finish them with the goal of developing a portfolio piece with a technique or a process that isn't very common nowadays in the games industry. So I'm gonna try to be a little bit of a pioneer at the same time that I make this rewarding, fun, and it gives me some, experience with this new tool. So yes, I do have. What's this Arsenal thing? I do have examples of those pieces. I ended up turning them into portfolio pieces and teaching pieces and breakdown pieces. I mean, it's not loading now. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's doing something with the camera. But that's the type of projects that I really enjoyed. Was the ones where I was making it about exploring workflows and so on. Yeah. So for me, learning is the biggest dopamine hit. It's not so much about results. It's about just maybe predicting that something is going to have an outcome. Sorry, and then that outcome roughly aligns with my expectations, and I think that gives me a great dopamine hit. So it's just a thought. I could do better every time I'm done. Yes, that's toxic. That's a little toxic, Lisa. But again, like probably something we should delve very deep into. If it's one of those things we talked about the previous episode, don't let perfect ruin great. If you've done 90% of your goal, then you're good. So let's keep going on this question. Should I post and keep older works to show growth or constantly delete and replace them with newer and better ones? That's a whole conversation to have. I like my portfolio to show who I am and who I've been as well. So I keep stuff that is like 5 years old, no problem. That's up to you. You know, do you want to show the stuff that's maybe not representing your current quality? What's your goal with that portfolio? Is it to, are you a teacher? Are you maybe a community leader in a way that, like, maybe you have your own community, your own friend community that, you know, they look up to you and they're thinking, oh, Lisa, you're so good and your portfolio is so great. And how do I get there? And, you know, keeping your older works is the best explanation of how you got there. So should I post it? Goals. What's the goal? What is the plan? What is your intention with a portfolio? And again, this is another whole thing, is working or work with intention and do things with intention. Intention should be a huge part of our lives. Is what do I want to do? Sometimes you have to course correct something. Sometimes you don't have to. But generally, when you have your own intentions, when you're pure, when you're like doing things your way, my experience, you're a little bit happier because you're actually following your heart, not someone else's ideas. So are you a shy person? Do you fear that maybe in an interview you will be asked about an older portfolio piece? Then don't keep them. Are you this community leader, this person who people look up to, and you know you want to show that older work? Maybe keep the one for from the last 5 years. I have work on our station that dates back to 12 years ago, and I don't have that on my profile because I am shy about that. And I've had interviews with people that were asking me about my older work, and they were actually making the interview about the older work rather than the newer one, because there is this conception, in my opinion, misconception, that the worst project in your portfolio is the one that represents your current quality. I find that absolute total bullshit. I'm going to be honest with you. Why? I'm getting a little angry even. But I find it bullshit because if it's clearly telling you this is 8 years old, how is it going to represent my current quality? You know? So, but I've had this experience. It's very sad, but I've had this experience of people asking me in interviews, like, why did you do this? Why did you make that decision? Man, I don't know. This was 8 years ago. Like, this doesn't represent me, you know? But obviously you don't want to be like that on an interview, and you have to be nice. And it can create a conflict for you is what I'm trying to say. Because sometimes in this industry, what should be is not what is. And it makes things unnecessarily difficult. And as my mom says, common sense sometimes is not the most common of senses. And when you keep older works, sometimes you are punished for this. It's like when recruiters say, do you have any real working experience in the last 5 years? Because you've only been a teacher. It's like, you know, I've learned more by teaching about problem solving that I have in 12 years of industry experience, if I can tell you that. But then they're living in their own little boxes, and it's very difficult to take them away from that. So do you think it's going to be problematic for you? Then maybe don't post it. Are you comfortable with showing the world and then facing the consequences of this non-ideal world and industry that we've created in a way? Then, you know, make a decision based on that. So let's see. For me, it was important to realize that not every study I do is supposed to be a portfolio piece, but if you want to post everything, LinkedIn is a good place for this. Yes, this is great. Not everything is content, but again, that's part of the intention. If you're working for content, then you're working for content. But sometimes, like, what happens is a lot of people mix things, and everything is content is a thing that people say nowadays. You have to turn everything into content. And I don't necessarily also agree with that. Like, all that extra attention, I don't know, at least for me, it makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. But could we consider this one also done? Because we have a very difficult question here. And I want to get to that one. So you asked these questions because I once mentioned that I sometimes enjoy this. We're talking about me. So let's revert this back to Lisa asking this question. Lisa's a student of mine, by the way, so we know each other a little bit more closely. I asked this because you once mentioned that you sometimes enjoy seeing professional growth reflected in other people's portfolios, but at the same time, I worry about leaving a bad impression. And on the other hand, having only 2 pieces in a portfolio that keep getting deleted and replaced might also feel a bit unhealthy. Yes, again, yes, that's what we talked about, but it's about that balance. It's like maybe find your comfort zone with your portfolio. Are you comfortable with 5 years? Are you comfortable with just 1 year? If you're doing those 12 pieces a year, are you comfortable with the 12 on the whole year? Or are you maybe just comfortable with the ones in your 6 months? Again, you live, you learn, and making mistakes or facing these sort of situations can shape your decision making as well. Like that interview made me hide a lot of pieces of my portfolio because, again, I was questioned about work that wasn't relevant to me anymore or wasn't relevant for the context of an interview. It was relevant for my students to find inspiration and examples of my own growth. But again, that backfired in a situation that I didn't need it to backfire. So again, you live, you learn, and that's what you need to balance out. So this is an incredibly difficult question, this next one. It's coming from Melissa, I believe. How can you free yourself of an art block rooted in future feedback? Like having the feeling that it will be wrong anyways and that no matter what you do, it will have been for nothing. I find myself being unsure and therefore becoming very slow when I fear that the client might not like what I made. When I don't have that fear, I am so much faster and confident. How can I let go of that fear and just create art no matter the possible feedback? I mean, we can get technical or we can get philosophical. Let's see. Let me just have a second to clean this up. Let's get physical. This chat. Yes, you should be sorry, actually. So, from the hard skills department, work non-destructively. So, non-destructive work. So, how does this look like, this non-destructive work? So, for me, this has been about, for example, adding details in Painter rather than sculpting them in ZBrush and bringing them over from the baking process. So when you work on these like phases non-destructively, you create your high poly and you try to have just enough detail so that when you get feedback, that feedback is just concerning the purpose, the intention of that high poly. So for me in hard surface, let's say what's the purpose? So what's the purpose of the step, right? So let's say the high poly. The high poly for me, it's silhouette. It's also details, okay, for some people, or it could be details. But then again, if our low poly is also about silhouette and details, sorry, not details, but it's probably like it's silhouette and optimization and so on. But let's talk about artistic silhouette, details, shading. There's a lot that could happen in a high poly, and then you make your low poly about the silhouette. You make the UVs plus bake. What is this? This is about like transferring, so let's not write that. And then your texturing could be about those details as well. So when you start to break down the purpose of these steps, for example, like I've made experiments in which, for example, I was able to remove the entirety of the high poly stage, because one of the things that you do in hard surface is with your high poly is baking the edges. So I can do my silhouette on the low poly. I can do my details on the texturing. I can do my shading on the low poly as well with things like weighted normals. And I can do these edge roundness in the bake. For example, using what's the name of it? The bevel. What's the name of it? In Marmoset, we have this new tool. Yeah, but what's the name of the tool? I don't remember now. The bevel shader. Yes, we can transfer these edges using the bevel shader. So when you start to break down your different steps and you start to realize what's the purpose of them, you can start to make the process as simple as possible for every step of the way. So if you're worried about progress, for example, and you feel very comfortable, like it's my case, at the texturing stage, you can start to delay things to the texturing stage. So communication is a huge part of non-destructive work. Like, hey, I plan to do this at a future stage. So you explain your process. I do this because of this, and that. So that uncertainty, if you take it to the part of the process that you feel the most comfortable with, there's something going on there on the chemistry of the brain that makes us feel just a little bit more happy, less anxious about things, less insecure as a result. So for the hard skills, as in a, let's say, small way, like a simple way of explaining it, for me it's non-destructiveness. Let's say hard skills. For me, in the hard skills department, non-destructive work is the best way to kind of offset this fear into the parts of the process where I feel a little bit more comfortable, or that if I actually get the feedback, if my fear comes true, it's not going to be so difficult to fix because I've worked in a non-destructive way. Obviously, as I said before, everything is sacrifices. So maybe setting something up for a non-destructive workflow can be a little bit slower. So if you start in 3ds Max, for example, and you start to have these chamfer modifier, and then you need a second chamfer, and you need to add an edit poly and generate a new selection, and then add another chamfer modifier, and then you start to add time to the process just because you want to work on a non-destructive way. But again, we're talking that it's blocking you. So if the way to unblock you is by using this non-destructive workflow, because then you're going to be a little bit more comfortable going back and fixing this feedback, that's a great thing to do. And then when it comes to the soft skills, this is like a lot more difficult. But I've been a lot happier when I didn't give a shit, when I didn't care about something. Now, does that really mean that I don't care about something? No, because I'm a hyper perfectionist. So for me, that's leveling down from toxic to healthy. It's leveling down from hyper perfectionism to just perfectionism to good enough, according to high standards. And we were talking about this in the last episode, that we tend to think about good enough as something that is like not actually good enough, So we had this example with Anya where I said, what happens when you deliver something and your lead says, oh, this is good enough. And she said, I would freak out, probably a lot of us would freak out. But if we put it on a context where we're working for this dream game of ours, in my case, it was Resident Evil 9, and we start to think, okay, so art director of Resident Evil 9, which is like such a benchmark for me in terms of quality, is saying that your art is good enough for Resident Evil 9. Then I'm like, hell yeah, I made it. That's my goal. So for me, it's about not worrying so much about things, like trying to create that distance. Now, easier said than done. How do you do this? For me, hobbies. And I was having this conversation with Gus, and he didn't know like what the all eggs, like don't put all your eggs in one basket meant. And I don't think I broke it down very well. But for me, it means don't assume like all risks in one operation. And in this particular case, I don't know how to thread that one. So I'm going to go back to the hobbies and why hobbies are good for not giving why am I always inclined to swear? To not giving things so much importance. Hobbies are good for not giving things so much importance. So let's say that's your life. Okay, this is your life. The whole worries in your mind, in your brain, in whatever. All the worries. And you're hyper obsessed with work. So 90% of your day or your worries are to work, and 10% of your worries are to have a nice meal throughout the day. Okay, it's only normal that if all you do in your life is work and eat and sleep, this balance is completely broken from the get-go. So you are caring too much. And let's figure this out. So caring too much to adjusting importance. And I think the colors are opposite here, but I'm guessing this is a little bit. Food is like 40% of what I think about. I mean, I didn't want to say it, but probably me too. Japanese food is probably like 39% of that as well. So let's see. So again, like when all these eggs, all the eggs of your worries are in this one basket, in this work basket, all you do in your day is work and eat. It's normal that you're going to be caring too much because your entire life, you care about your life, and all your life is work. So you're going to care a lot about work. So that hyper perfectionism is going to be there. It has to go well, because if things don't go as well as we want, we start to incur into like depression and am I doing enough? And why aren't things going my way? And, like, why am I not progressing? Or when you get stuck, it feels like I'm super bored with my life and I need to change something. And in my case, it creates an incredible, snowball of terrible feelings. But then let's say we make work about what it is, work, what we sustain our life with. And then we start to work for ourselves. So I'm an artist. I love doing art. And since I started working, I felt like the only valuable and productive way that I had to make art was by making art for someone else, being hired to make art. And that's not true. But again, that turned me into that person who was like caring way too much. But then I started to introduce these hobbies. And I'm like, okay, what if instead of making a game for someone else, I make it for myself? So now you understand that work is a small part of the things that you care about. And maybe the game that you're building by yourself also could take a lot of that importance, like what you care about in your life. And then you start to add something else, maybe photography. And then all of a sudden, let's give these different colors just for the analogy. And then this is the food. Previously, and I hope this graph makes some sort of sense. Previously, and I hope I'm also not going in a direction that, doesn't make too much sense. Is this helping, Melissa? Obviously, we haven't gotten to a conclusion yet, but previously I was here. And when work was not doing great, my whole life wasn't doing great. It's just normal because all I do is work. All of a sudden, when work doesn't go so well, I can support myself by my hobbies. Not monetarily, but I can at least, in terms of like the perception of how my life is going. It's not only about this one part of my life that isn't doing so well. So now I have other things to compensate. If working for myself is going all right and photography is also going decently, then look, all of a sudden, 75% of my life is going well, and just 25% is doing maybe a little iffy. But again, this is going to give me the chance to take a break. Okay, so for a while, when this happens, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to forget about work for a little, and I'm just going to focus on this. I'm going to take a holiday, and in this holiday, I'm going to work on my work, and then I'm also going to go on a trip and take some pictures. So all of a sudden, this starts to heal, starts to get a little better, and then a little better. Because now you have time to think. And when you think from anxiety, one of the things that I was taught in therapy was never make choices in a state of anxiety. And this is a really important lesson that I had to learn in my life. Because when I was feeling wrong, what's the natural thing when something goes wrong? All right, people in the chat. What is it? Worry. Worry about what? To fix it, to change it. And anxiety naturally is this feeling of something isn't right. So all my life I was looking for a solution based on just one part of my life not being right. Why? Because I didn't work on creating a balance. So I'm not saying that's your case, Melissa. I don't want to do this like it's the first time you come to these sessions. I don't want to make this about this is the solution to your, because I'm not that, I'm not that. That's up to you, But definitely when it comes to hard skills, it's the non-destructive workflow. And when it comes to the soft skills, is adjusting the importance so that you can downgrade from hyper-perfectionism to perfectionism to good enough is good. So that's where I was going with this point. It's not about what changes you need to do in your life, it's what could help you to downgrade the hyper-perfectionism to a healthy sort of caring about something. And you're saying in the chat, the whole confidence thing is hard to break, I think. Like, I work non-destructively as much as I can, kind of obsessed with it too. But sometimes I just feel not confident and incompetent, and then I just rotate the mesh around. Yeah, I get it. I get it. And that probably will never go away. Like, for me, it doesn't, it doesn't matter how much I feel other people telling me, but man, like, how are you saying this? You're so good. And I'm saying it and I'm believing it, I'm really thinking I'm not doing good enough. But then it's this unideal version of ourselves that thinks like that. And in reality, we have to think about what else we are in a team. Are we just art producers, or are we also nice people who can help other people? Maybe, I don't know, try to exploit the other good traits that you have in your personality, because I think you're a nice person. I think you can do great breakdowns if you want to, and maybe you can like talk to other people like you do with me. We didn't know each other too well, and here we are. So maybe we can take this analogy and take it from work to, instead of the worries, we can make it about our worth and where it's coming from. So if we make our worth only about our direct contributions, when we aren't doing so great sometimes, which is the normal thing that happens to everybody, especially if you've gone through a traumatic situation that made you feel like you're not good enough. Like, those direct contributions, they feel like they're the 100% of what we have to do in production. But in reality, again, it's very much split. It's the direct contributions, is how much we can help. It's, let's say, it's our feedback. But again, this is all ways of helping, that's finding ways of helping. How much we can help. Like, maybe I don't need to be the one setting the benchmarks for the team. Maybe I can just be really good at understanding the process and digesting it and explaining it to other people. So that's some work, that introspection that you have to do. Is like, is my goal to be perfect in just direct contributions, in just work? Or what is my goal? And you're saying it's also this fear that everyone is replaceable, and it has gotten so bad in the last 2 years. Yes, but and here's the probably one of the things that helped me the most is, if you do your best, what else can you do? Okay, so let's say that every day you wake up in the morning, you go to work, and you do your best, which means you don't procrastinate. You don't go to create coffee. You don't go for a coffee every, let's say, 10 minutes. You actually get some work done, and you do it with passion. You do it with love. When you're in a meeting, you're trying to help people, and you're actually doing your best. You're like, I get home and I feel like, okay, so realistically, again, giving yourself the time to think about what you've done, that retrospective and introspective at the same time. Realistically, what could I have done better? The answer sometimes is, well, I could have maybe not made this mistake. Okay, but making mistakes is normal. So within not being Wonder Woman, what could I have done better? And again, if you're not this person who procrastinates, the answer is nothing. I did my best. So if I did my best, there's nothing else I can do. So it's just about pushing the limits a bit, like bit by bit, and keep pushing every day. Just grow a little bit, grow 0.0001% every day. If that's what you have to do, that's still growth. Sometimes growth looks like, you're completely stuck, but maybe you're learning on things that you don't know. So sticking to your routine, and again, like, not procrastinating and trying to do your best is most of the time what helped me the most when it comes to the feeling of not being enough. And because I remember going to coffee with friends from work and thinking, guys, I'm getting fired tomorrow. Like, I know I'm getting fired tomorrow. And it was just me, who was thinking I was not doing enough. But then they were saying, like, this is when I was 19, and it went all the way through until I worked with Matt, this lead that I had in the UK, who told me, like, he caught on to that, and he said, Javi, but look, you're doing your best. Like, I can see you're doing your best. So if you're doing your best, what else can you do? Can you do better than your best? And I was like, okay, you just solved my trauma, So when you realize your best, when you realize that you were having those conversations with your friends thinking, I'm going to get fired, but at the same time, you were really pushing and maybe even like doing hours and doing more than you should, and still feel like you're not enough. Maybe that's something about, first of all, a super normal thing, but also something that requires that introspective every day, those 5 minutes of thinking, okay, I feel like I'm not doing enough. So rather than punishing myself with it, I'm going to be thinking, did I do my best? And you're going to be thinking. Again, I'm repeating myself here, but you're going to be really thinking. I could have done this better, but again, that would be being Wonder Woman. You're going to be honest with yourself, and you're going to be, if you might find mistakes, but that's actually a good thing, because when you find your mistakes, that means that you have the chance to develop a plan to fix them. So just recognize what's happening here. Just recognize that sometimes this not feeling so good with ourselves is what's pushing us to being the best people that we know around us. And that's also something that I understood, that because I was so self-critical, I ended up being top 3 of every production team that I joined in the past years. So yeah, just recognize that sometimes these mechanisms, this is something that I tell my students, especially in the context where they feel like I'm angry or I'm disappointed, is that good feelings are always easy to digest, but a lot of the time we don't learn how to digest the bad feelings. And this is a bad feeling that is very common, that we always have, is the feeling of being too self-critical. It's something that we just block, So don't block it. Learn from it. Know that it's a power that you have. It's an actual hidden power that all of us have. That being very self-critical is pushing us to be better. When you're on top of the wave and you're like, yeah, I mean, nothing else to do. I'm so comfortable. I'm so good. That's when you stop learning. So that you're having this feeling is a good thing if you know how to use it. And Melissa is saying, being honest with oneself can be difficult when everything seems to be so warped when it comes to the worth of a person. Gus is saying, Melissa, you sound nice. Can we be friends? Had recommends against being Gus' friend. No, that's so bad. It's a joke. Tisha is saying, me too. Just for the record, Gus started it. No, Gus started it, Rodri. He really did. He called me old. Gus, do you want to see what Gus did, Rodri? Do you want to see what Gus did? Look. So we are not gonna forgive him. Anyways, back to being on track. Melissa, yes, the industry makes us feel sometimes makes us feel super unworthy, super like you're not good enough for anything, because there's always people that are better than you. Eventually, and this is something that I found with photography, is you will find your own style and your own space in the world, and you will realize that the industry is a small part of the world and your life, and that sometimes your worth is just coming from unexpected places, and that it's very natural to feel like you're not worthy. We talked about this on the first episode about the dark triad: Machiavellism, psychopathy, and narcissism. And these 3 are about feeling like you're better than anybody, in a way, with their own things, each of them. So yeah, it's just natural that you feel like that, and everybody does. Like I don't think there's anybody in this chat who doesn't feel like this. And it's based on the anxiety and the insecurity that there's something to fix, but in reality the only thing that you can fix is that self-worth, where you're seeking the validation of that self-worth. I don't think validation is the right word, because it has a different connotation in our lingo, but definitely, like, in a way, I'm sure that if you were being constantly validated, like with promotions, with better salaries, with the industry accepting you, you would be a lot more comfortable with yourself, but still most likely feeling a little bit like you're not doing enough, which has been my position for a long time. But sorry, Melissa, I hope that's making sense and that helped. It was an incredibly good question. So taking our common friend as an example, he has been working on a single company. Sorry, I'll say it, because then on the edit it doesn't happen, and I just... Next question. Taking our common friend as an example, he has been working on a single company for some time, fully focused on one direction for a certain project, and he hasn't been doing props or personal portfolio work in his free time. Is it risky to abandon a personal portfolio like that? What if something happens to the company and he suddenly has to look for a new job but has nothing in his portfolio with his certain skills? Do you think it's necessary to always keep yourself ready for a job searching and competitive, or is it okay to sometimes take a break and not worry about it? Also a really good question. I call this the mattress. You have the mattress. Hey Anya, how's it going? You have your mattress, and that's kind of like your backup. So sometimes that backup is savings. Sometimes it's a portfolio. Sometimes it's a plan B, that sort of interviewing for other companies. And the mistake we make a lot of the times is being a little bit too comfortable. And the mistake we also make sometimes is to be a little bit too uncomfortable. But generally, when you're working on a company for a long time, this tends to happen. I think I'm a great example of this. I probably haven't worked on personal portfolio outside of like teaching projects since I started working. I think I've done one portfolio piece in the past 10 years outside of working or some sort of somebody asking for some work as exchange, like with a compensation. So yes, probably for the past 10 years I haven't worked on a portfolio project, like a personal portfolio project. Is it risky? Yes, but also, okay, Melissa, thank you for being here. So yes, it's risky, but there's other ways to create that backup. So if, for example, you're working on your savings, you can afford to maybe not work and develop a portfolio for, let's say, 6 months. Engage in another job search with the goal to engage in another job search. If you have a portfolio, then you are ready for that job search. When you have that plan B, you're interviewing for other companies already. That opportunity might be right around the corner. When you have friends and connections, maybe, which is my case particularly, that's your backup. And I would say connections is probably the most important backup, is knowing people that are well positioned in other companies. And that takes time. Okay. So sometimes that's not the way to go. Or just you don't have access to that, or everybody is in the same boat as you are, and it's probably a risky move. So I would say it's again like the balance. I don't have the drawing, but it's the balance, and the balance that you are creating, and the priorities that you have. So for example, I don't work on savings. I do now, but I didn't used to focus on my savings. Why? Because I had some certain level of stability. I had other things. I didn't work on portfolio either. So then I knew that I had to put my efforts on my plan B and my connections. Sometimes you don't have access to connections, and maybe you don't nail any interviews because you don't have a portfolio that you have worked on or that is ready for that job search. So choose, if you neglect them all, that is the risk. And then there's probably more than these sort of backup plans. But if you neglect all of them, then 100% it's a risk. So again, it's that balance. If I prefer to not work on my savings because I want to eat out and work on my mental health when I'm outside of the company, and I don't work on the portfolio also because I value my free time outside of a computer, then I know that I have to work on these things, And I think that's what you're talking about. You're not working on your portfolio because our common friend is very busy already with his work. And if he wants to live a good work-life balance that isn't about work or the next job that he's going to find, then he's going to have to find different plan Bs. Either be interviewing on other companies already, or having connections that can help him access what's going on, those interviews. Does that make sense? So yes, I think it's necessary to always keep yourself ready for a job search, but it's in a different way. So sometimes you're ready to be on step 2, which is to apply. Sometimes you're just ready to be on step 1 because you have enough savings to start from scratch again. And sometimes if you have those savings, you can allow some healing of that burnout. That's also going to produce a better portfolio as a result. And let's go to the last question. Before I tried 3D, I worked in freelance animation, moving from one small project to another. Have you had this kind of experience, and what do you think about trying to do it as a beginner? Would that be valuable experience, or could it actually hold back professional growth and making it better to focus on finding a real team right away and learning directly from others? The job sometimes it's about jumping around from a project to another. Sometimes I've been part of like a lot of what they called strike teams, teams that were built just to solve problems from a project and then the next one, and you were having to jump from one to the other. And it's very common to jump from a task to a different one, even if it's on the same project. Sometimes there's tasks that are different enough from each other that you might think I'm not learning anything. But with this sort of jumping around also comes versatility, also comes a different range of the things you can do. You become a little bit more of a generalist, and you become a person capable of solving different problems. Experience is experience, and I don't think there's one experience better than other experience just because. I think there's experience that is better for our goals. So if you want to work on a project for 5 years and don't move from a position and just be making detailed environments with the same style and inside of the same areas and the same time, like storytelling and the time frame that story is happening in, then this is bad for you. But if you want to be sharp as a surgical knife when it comes to problem solving, when it comes to exploring different types of art styles, different even disciplines like weapons, environments, sometimes even characters. There's companies that have like real wide generalist roles. Then this is a great thing for you. A beginner or not so much a beginner. I actually got used to this. I got used in the beginning. I got used to being in one project and then another, and it built me. It built my character around like this. I enjoyed it a lot. I love it, and I love waking up every morning and not knowing what it's gonna be. So it adapts very well to my goals, which is to stay sharp and to kind of problem solve every day. Because when you're when you're solving the same problem every day, it's not a problem anymore. It's like a bother. It's like cleaning your house. When every day you're solving the problem of somebody being messy, you know how that person is messy, and it starts to be, that's Lisa being messy again. But instead, if you're being moved around from one thing to the other, it's going to keep you sharp at problem solving, which at the end of the day, for me, is the most valuable skill to have in games development. Does that work, Lisa? Okay. So that's it. That's our third episode of the Art Therapy. This was very interesting, actually. I believe that, I don't know, I had a lot of fun. So again, what's the hand? This one? Yes. If you want to find more information about what I do, just check out my courses in the link below, artojavi.com. We're very close to closing the application period, just 13 days away, I believe, 14 maybe. But there's still some spots left for the apprenticeships. And yeah, thanks everyone who participated with their questions. This was amazing questions, very challenging to solve. But what do you think, chat? Do we think that this was valuable? We're going to get very positive feedback from this. Okay, everyone. So thank you very much for being here. I'm going to pause the recording now and have a great day. Goodbye.